The rain came down in sheets so thick that Clara Zimmerman could barely see 3 feet ahead of her mule. But she had promised Mrs. Henderson her linens by supper time, and Clara Zimmerman never broke a promise, not even when the Montana sky opened up like the Lord himself had overturned a bucket. It was late April in 1876, and Bannack had seen more rain in the past week than it typically saw in a month, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud that sucked at wagon wheels and made every step a battle. Clara clutched the oilcloth tighter around the basket of freshly laundered sheets and shirts, her own dress already soaked through despite her best efforts, water dripping from the brim of her bonnet in a steady stream that blurred her vision. She was 22 years old and had been running her late mother's laundry business for 3 years now, ever since consumption had taken both her parents within 6 months of each other, leaving Clara alone in the world with nothing but a washtub, a mangle, and a reputation for getting stains out that no one else could touch. The Henderson Ranch sat 2 miles outside of town, and Clara had made this journey dozens of times, but never in weather like this. The road had become a quagmire, and her mule, a stubborn creature named Sadie, kept trying to turn back toward the warm stable they had left behind. Clara urged her forward with gentle words and a firm hand on the reins, knowing that if she turned back now, the Hendersons would go without their clean linens, and more importantly, they might take their business elsewhere. She could not afford to lose customers, not when the bank was already breathing down her neck about the loan. Her father had taken out to buy the property, where her small house and laundry sat on the edge of Bannack's Main Street. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Sadie planted her hooves in the mud, refusing to take another step. Clara was about to climb down and try to lead the mule by hand when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast through the rain. Her heart jumped into her throat because a woman alone on a deserted road was vulnerable in ways that made her mother's warnings echo in her memory. But then a rider emerged from the downpour, sitting tall in the saddle on a big bay horse that looked like it could run through fire and not break stride. The man pulled his horse alongside her mule, and Clara found herself looking up into a face that was all hard angles and weathered skin, with eyes the color of winter ice that somehow still held warmth when they landed on her. He wore a black hat pulled low against the rain, a dark duster that was as soaked as her own clothes, and there was something about the way he sat his horse that spoke of years spent in the saddle, of a man who was more comfortable outdoors than in. A silver star gleamed on his chest, just visible beneath the duster, and Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders because a lawman meant safety, even if this particular lawman looked like he could be just as dangerous as the outlaws he chased. "You are going to catch your death out here," he said, and his voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed. "What are you doing riding in this storm?" Clara lifted her chin, defensive despite the relief she felt at no longer being alone. "I am delivering laundry to the Henderson Ranch. They are expecting these linens, and I gave my word." The lawman looked at her like she had just told him she was planning to sprout wings and fly to the moon. "Lady, there is not a set of clean sheets in the world worth drowning for. This road is going to wash out completely if this rain keeps up, and you will be stuck out here with no shelter." "I will be fine," Clara said, even though she was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering, even though her fingers had gone numb on the reins, even though she knew he was probably right and she was being foolish. "I appreciate your concern, but I can manage." He studied her for a long moment, rain pouring off the brim of his hat, and then he shook his head. "No, you cannot. My place is half a mile up this road, and it is on the way to the Henderson Ranch. You are coming with me to wait out this storm, and then I will make sure you get where you are going safely." "I do not even know you," Clara protested, but her voice lacked conviction because the cold had seeped into her bones, and the thought of a warm, dry place was more tempting than anything she had felt in years. "Franklin Sutherland," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow courtly despite the circumstances. "I am the deputy marshal for this territory, and I have a cabin just ahead with a good fire and hot coffee. You can dry off, warm up, and I will ride with you to make your delivery once this weather breaks." Clara hesitated, knowing that going anywhere with a strange man was a risk, but something in those winter blue eyes made her want to trust him. And more than that, she was practical enough to know that she really might die if she stayed out in this storm much longer. "Clara Zimmerman," she said finally. "I run the laundry in Bannack." "I know who you are," Franklin said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more sharply. "I have seen you in town. You are the one who got the blood out of Sheriff Miller's shirt after that shooting last month." She had done that, spending hours working on the stains until the white cotton was pristine again, and she felt an odd flush of pleasure that this man had noticed, that he knew her by her work. "That is my job," she said simply. "It is a good job, and you are good at it," Franklin replied. "But right now, your job is to not freeze to death in this rain. Come on, Miss Zimmerman. Deliver yourself to me instead of those linens, and I promise you will stay dry and safe." The way he said it, low and almost gentle despite the gruffness of his voice, made something warm unfurl in Clara's chest, something that had nothing to do with the prospect of shelter, and everything to do with the way he was looking at her, like she mattered, like her safety was important. She had been alone for so long, making her own way in the world, that the idea of someone wanting to take care of her, even for just an afternoon, was almost overwhelming. "All right," she said, and watched something like relief cross his rugged features. "But only until the storm passes. I still need to make my delivery." "Fair enough," Franklin said, and then he was reaching over to take Sadie's reins from her numb fingers, leading both animals up the muddy road while Clara clung to her basket of laundry and tried not to think about how her heart was beating faster than it should, how aware she was of this stranger riding beside her through the rain. The cabin appeared out of the downpour like something from a dream, a solid structure of logs and stone with smoke rising from the chimney and light glowing in the windows. Franklin dismounted and then reached up to help Clara down, his hands strong and sure on her waist, and she felt the warmth of him even through their wet clothes. He led her quickly to the door while taking both animals around to a lean-to shelter on the side of the cabin where they would be protected from the worst of the weather. And then he was back, ushering her inside with a hand on the small of her back that felt oddly intimate. The interior of the cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace where a good fire crackled, a table and chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves lined with books and supplies. It was a bachelor's home, but it was well kept, and Clara felt herself relaxing slightly as the warmth began to seep into her frozen limbs. Franklin closed the door against the storm and then turned to look at her, really look at her, and she became suddenly aware of how she must appear, soaked to the skin with her hair plastered to her face, and her dress clinging to her body in ways that were not entirely proper. "You need to get out of those wet things," Franklin said, and his voice had gone even rougher. "I will turn my back and you can wrap yourself in that blanket by the fire. I will hang your dress to dry." Clara knew he was right, knew that staying in wet clothes was asking for sickness, but the intimacy of undressing in a strange man's cabin made her hesitate. Franklin seemed to understand because he walked to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a large, rough wool blanket, handing it to her without meeting her eyes. "I give you my word as a lawman and a gentleman that I will not look, and I will not touch you unless you want me to." "You are safe here, Miss Zimmerman. I just want to make sure you do not catch pneumonia." There was such sincerity in his voice that Clara found herself nodding, taking the blanket from him. Franklin turned his back and busied himself with stoking the fire and setting a pot of coffee on to heat, and Clara quickly stripped out of her soaked dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in the blanket that smelled like wood smoke and something else, something masculine and clean that made her think of open spaces and freedom. She draped her clothes over a chair near the fire and then sat down on the hearth, close enough to feel the heat, but not so close that she would scorch the blanket. "You can turn around now," she said softly, and Franklin did, his eyes finding hers immediately and holding them for a moment before he deliberately looked away, focusing on pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He handed her one, and Clara wrapped her cold fingers around it gratefully, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain hammer on the roof and the wind howl around the eaves, and Clara found herself studying Franklin when he was not looking, taking in the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held his coffee cup with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the hardness of the rest of him. "How long have you been a deputy marshal?" she asked finally, needing to break the silence that was becoming too charged, too aware. 6 years, Franklin said, settling into the chair across from her. "I started as a deputy sheriff in Texas, worked my way up. Came to Montana 3 years ago when they needed someone to help deal with the road agents and claim jumpers." "That must be dangerous work," Clara said, thinking of the stories she had heard about shootouts and ambushes, about lawmen who died with their boots on and left widows behind. "It can be," Franklin admitted, "but it is important work. Someone has to stand between decent folks and those who would take advantage of them." He paused, took a sip of his coffee. "What about you? How did you end up running a laundry business?" Clara told him about her parents, about learning the trade from her mother, about taking over when they died and discovering that she had a gift for it, that she could look at a stain and know exactly what combination of lye and borax and elbow grease would lift it. She told him about the long hours and the hard work, about the satisfaction she felt when she returned a shirt whiter than new, about the way her customers trusted her with their finest linens and their dirtiest secrets, because a laundress saw everything, from bloodstains to lipstick marks to the evidence of lives lived behind closed doors. Franklin listened with an attention that Clara was not used to, with an interest that made her feel like what she was saying mattered, like she mattered. And by the time she finished talking, she realized that she had told him more about herself than she had told anyone in years, that there was something about this rough-edged lawman that made her want to open up, to share the parts of herself she usually kept hidden. "You are remarkable," Franklin said when she fell silent, and the way he said it with such simple honesty made her breath catch. "You lost everything and you built a life for yourself anyway. That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," Clara said with a small smile, trying to deflect the intensity of his gaze, the way it made her feel warm in places that had nothing to do with the fire. "Courage and stubbornness often look the same," Franklin replied, and then he was standing, moving to check her dress. "This is still soaked. It is going to take hours to dry properly, and this storm does not look like it is letting up anytime soon." Clara looked at the window, seeing nothing but rain and gray, and felt a flutter of something that might have been nervousness or might have been excitement. "The Hendersons will be wondering where I am. The Hendersons will understand that you could not make it in this weather," Franklin said firmly. "They would not want you risking your life for their clean sheets." He paused, seemed to be wrestling with something, and then continued. "You should stay here until morning. The storm will have passed by then, and I will ride with you to make your delivery. You will be safe, Miss Zimmerman. I will sleep on the floor and you can have the bed." The thought of spending the night in this cabin with this man should have scandalized her, should have sent her running back out into the rain despite the danger. But Clara found that she did not want to leave, that the thought of staying here with Franklin felt right in a way she could not explain. "What will people say?" she asked, but it was a weak protest and they both knew it. "People will say that a deputy marshal kept a woman from dying in a storm," Franklin said, "and anyone who says different will answer to me." There was something fierce in his voice, something protective that made Clara's heart skip a beat. She had been taking care of herself for so long that the idea of someone wanting to protect her, to defend her reputation and her safety, was intoxicating. "All right," she said quietly. "I will stay." "Thank you, Mr. Sutherland." "Franklin," he said, his eyes holding hers. "If you are spending the night in my cabin, you should call me Franklin." "Franklin," Clara repeated, testing the name on her tongue, liking the way it felt. "Then you should call me Clara." "Clara," he said. And the way he said her name, soft and rough at the same time, made her shiver despite the warmth of the blanket and the fire. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, the conversation flowing easier than it had any right to between two people who had been strangers that morning. Franklin told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about learning to rope and ride before he could read, about watching his father lose everything to a crooked land agent, and deciding then that he wanted to be someone who stood for justice, who made sure that the powerful could not just take what they wanted from the weak. Clara told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about coming west with her parents when she was 15, about falling in love with the wild beauty of Montana, even as she struggled with the hardness of frontier life. They talked about books, discovering that they both loved the novels of Charles Dickens and Mark Twain, about horses and weather and the way the mountains looked in the morning light. And through it all, Clara found herself watching Franklin's mouth as he talked, found herself noticing the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, found herself wanting to reach out and touch him in ways that made her blush even in the warmth of the cabin. As evening fell, Franklin made them a simple supper of beans and bacon and cornbread, apologizing for the plainness of it. But Clara thought it was the best meal she had eaten in months, maybe because of the company, maybe because of the way Franklin served her first and made sure she had enough before taking his own portion. Small gestures of care that she had not experienced since her parents died. They ate by lamplight while the storm continued to rage outside, and Clara felt like they were the only two people in the world, like the cabin was a refuge not just from the weather but from everything, from loneliness and responsibility, and the weight of always having to be strong. After supper, Franklin insisted she take the bed while he made up a pallet on the floor by the fire, spreading blankets and his bedroll with practiced efficiency. Clara protested, but he would not hear of it, and finally she gave in, climbing into the narrow bed that smelled like him, like wood smoke and leather and man, and trying not to think about how much she wished he was climbing in beside her, how much she wanted to feel his arms around her, to not be alone for just one night. She must have dozed off despite the strangeness of the situation because she woke in darkness to the sound of Franklin moving around the cabin, his footsteps quiet but purposeful. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Just checking the fire," Franklin said softly. Go back to sleep, Clara. But she could not sleep, not now, not when she was so aware of him just a few feet away, not when her body was humming with an awareness she had never felt before. "Franklin," she said into the darkness. "Yes. Why did you help me today?" "You could have just ridden past. Let me figure things out on my own." There was a long silence, and then she heard him move closer to the bed, felt him settle on the floor beside it so they could talk without raising their voices. "Because I have been watching you for months," he said finally, his voice raw with honesty. "Every time I am in town, I find excuses to walk past your shop, to catch a glimpse of you hanging laundry or talking to customers. I have been trying to work up the courage to speak to you properly, to maybe ask if I could call on you, but I am not good with words, and you always seem so capable, so self-sufficient, that I figured you would not have any use for a rough cowboy who spends most of his time chasing outlaws." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You have been watching me." "Not in a bad way," Franklin said quickly. "Just noticing you, admiring you. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, Clara, and it is not just your face, though that would be enough. It is the way you work, the way you hold your head up even when things are hard, the way you are kind to everyone even when they do not deserve it. I have been halfway in love with you since the first time I saw you. And today, when I came across you in that storm, looking like a half-drowned angel who was too stubborn to admit she needed help, I knew I could not let you go without at least trying to know you, even if it was just for one afternoon. I have noticed you too," she whispered into the darkness. "I did not know if you even knew I existed, but I noticed you." She heard Franklin's breath catch, and then his hand found hers where it rested on the edge of the bed, his fingers warm and calloused and gentle. "Can I court you properly, Clara? Can I come calling when this storm is over and see if maybe what I feel, what we might both feel, could turn into something real?" "Yes," Clara said, and she was crying now, but they were good tears, happy tears, the kind that came from hope finally being allowed to take root. "Yes, Franklin, you can court me." His hand tightened on hers, and they stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on to each other in the darkness while the storm raged outside and something new and precious began to grow between them. Morning came with clear skies and the kind of brilliant sunshine that only follows a storm, the world washed clean and sparkling. Clara woke to find her dress dry and carefully laid out for her, and Franklin already up, making coffee and breakfast with his back, turned to give her privacy to dress. They ate quickly, both of them suddenly shy now that daylight had returned, now that the intimacy of the night was behind them, and they had to face what they had admitted to each other. Franklin saddled both their animals and loaded Clara's basket of laundry, which had miraculously stayed dry thanks to the oilcloth, and then they set out for the Henderson ranch together. The road was a mess, muddy and rutted, but passable in the clear morning air, and Clara found herself glad for Franklin's presence beside her, for the way he kept his horse close to her mule and made sure she did not have any trouble navigating the worst spots. The Hendersons were relieved to see her, having worried when she did not arrive the previous day, and they listened to Franklin's explanation of the storm, and his insistence that Clara stay at his cabin for safety, without any hint of scandal or judgment. Clara delivered the laundry, accepted payment, and promised to return the following week for the next batch, and then Franklin was helping her back onto Sadie, and they were riding back toward Bannack together. "Can I see you tomorrow?" Franklin asked as they neared the edge of town, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Clara want to reach out and touch him, to reassure him that what they had found was real. "You can see me today if you want," Clara said, feeling bold and reckless and more alive than she had felt in years. "Come to supper at my place tonight. I will make you a proper meal and we can talk more." Franklin's face lit up with a smile that transformed his hard features into something beautiful, and Clara felt her breath catch at the sight of it. "I will be there," he promised. 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, Clara agreed. And then they were at her shop and Franklin was helping her down, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, his eyes holding promises that made her heart race. Over the following weeks and months, Franklin became a constant presence in Clara's life, stopping by the laundry shop whenever he was in town, helping her with heavy work like hauling water and moving the big copper tubs, sitting with her in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. He courted her properly, with flowers picked from the meadows outside town and small gifts that showed he paid attention to what she liked. A hair ribbon in her favorite shade of blue, a book she had mentioned wanting to read, a new scrub brush when he noticed hers was wearing down. Clara found herself falling for him a little more each day, falling for his quiet strength and his dry sense of humor, for the way he treated her like she was precious even while respecting her independence and capability. He never tried to take over her business or tell her what to do, but he was always there when she needed help, always willing to lend a hand or an ear, and the people of Bannack began to see them as a unit, as Franklin and Clara, the deputy marshal and the laundress who were clearly meant for each other. It was 3 months after that rainy day when Franklin took Clara on a picnic up into the mountains, spreading a blanket in a meadow filled with wildflowers, and unpacking a basket of food he had clearly put considerable thought into preparing. They ate and talked and laughed, and then Franklin was pulling her to her feet and leading her to the edge of the meadow where the view opened up to show the sweep of the valley below. Bannack nestled like a toy town in the distance. "I love you, Clara," Franklin said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. "I have loved you since that day in the rain when you were so stubborn and brave and beautiful that I could not help myself. I know I am not much, just a lawman with a dangerous job and a simple cabin, but I promise I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me? Will you deliver yourself to me permanently, and let me make sure you stay safe and loved and dry always?" Clara was crying again, but she was also laughing, joy bubbling up in her chest like champagne. "Yes," she said, and then she was kissing him, really kissing him for the first time, feeling his arms come around her and hold her close, feeling the strength and warmth of him and knowing that she had found home, that this was where she was meant to be. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Bannack, with half the town in attendance because everyone loved Clara and everyone respected Franklin, and people were happy to see two good people find happiness together. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Franklin wore his best suit with his hair slicked back, and his eyes shining with emotion as he watched his bride come down the aisle. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Franklin kissed Clara like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the congregation cheered and threw rice as they walked back down the aisle together, ready to start their new life. Clara moved into Franklin's cabin, though she kept running the laundry business because it was hers, and she loved it, and Franklin would never have asked her to give it up. They worked out a routine where Franklin would help her haul water and fuel in the mornings before he went out on his rounds, and Clara would have supper waiting when he came home in the evenings, and they would spend the nights talking and making love and building the kind of partnership that was the foundation of any good marriage. Life was not always easy. Franklin's work was dangerous, and there were nights when Clara would lie awake worrying until she heard his horse in the yard, nights when he would come home hurt or exhausted or shaken by something he had seen. There was the time he was shot by a claim jumper, and Clara nursed him through fever and infection, sitting by his bedside for 3 days without sleep, until he finally turned the corner, and she knew he would live. There was the time her biggest customer moved away, and she thought she would lose the business, until Franklin helped her advertise in the nearby mining camps, and she found a whole new set of customers among the miners who desperately needed someone who could get ore dust and mud out of their clothes. Through it all, They held onto each other, finding strength in their partnership, in the love that had started in a rainstorm and grown into something solid and lasting. Franklin would come home from the hardest days, and Clara would hold him, letting him talk or not talk as he needed, just being there, being his safe harbor. Clara would worry about money or a difficult customer, and Franklin would help her think through solutions, would remind her of how capable she was, how she had built something from nothing and could do it again if she had to. A year into their marriage, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Franklin over supper one evening, watching his face transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair, and when he finally pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he said, like he was testing the words, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby," Clara confirmed, laughing at his expression, at the way he immediately started fussing over her, insisting she sit down and put her feet up, asking if she felt all right, if she needed anything. "Franklin, I am pregnant, not dying," Clara said with affectionate exasperation. "I will be fine. Women have babies all the time." "But you are my woman having my baby," Franklin said stubbornly. "That makes it different." Clara could not argue with that logic, and in truth, she loved the way he took care of her through the pregnancy, the way he would not let her lift anything heavy and insisted on hiring a girl from town to help with the laundry when she got too big to stand at the washtubs for hours on end. She loved the way he would rest his hand on her growing belly in the evenings, talking to their child and telling stories about what their life would be like, painting pictures of family and love and belonging that made Clara's heart ache with happiness. Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1877, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced he was strong and healthy and ready to take on life. Franklin was there for the birth, holding Clara's hand and wiping her brow and telling her how brave she was, how strong, how much he loved her. And when the midwife finally placed their son in Clara's arms, Franklin looked at them both with such love and wonder that Clara fell in love with him all over again. They named him James, after Franklin's father, and he was a perfect baby with Franklin's blue eyes and Clara's dark hair. Franklin was a natural father, patient and gentle and completely besotted with his son, and Clara would often find them together, Franklin holding the baby and talking to him in a low voice, telling him about the ranch in Texas where he had grown up, about the mountains of Montana, about the mother who loved him more than anything. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that included midnight feedings and diaper changes, and the exhausted joy that came with new parenthood. Clara kept the laundry business going with the help of her assistant, working around James's naps and feedings, and Franklin adjusted his schedule so he was home more, taking fewer overnight trips and making sure he was there to help with the baby and to give Clara breaks when she needed them. As James grew from a baby into a toddler, the cabin began to feel small, and Franklin started talking about building them a proper house, something with more rooms and a bigger kitchen, maybe even a separate building for the laundry so Clara did not have to work in town anymore. He had saved money over his years as a lawman, and Clara's business was doing well, and together they had enough to make it happen. They found a piece of land just outside Bannack, 5 acres with a creek running through it and good soil for a garden, and Franklin spent his days off building their house with his own hands, with Clara beside him helping as much as she could while also watching James and keeping the laundry business running. It took a year, but when it was finished, the house was beautiful. A solid 2-story structure with a big kitchen and parlor downstairs, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and a separate laundry building with running water from the creek and plenty of space for all of Clara's equipment. They moved in on a bright spring day in 1879, exactly 3 years after that rainstorm that had brought them together, and Franklin carried Clara over the threshold while James toddled behind them, laughing at his parents' antics. That night, after they had put James to bed in his new room and unpacked enough to make the house feel like home, Franklin and Clara stood on the porch and looked out at their land, at the home they had built together. "Remember when I told you to deliver yourself to me instead of those linens?" Franklin asked, pulling Clara close against his side. "I remember," Clara said, leaning into him. "Best decision I ever made." "Best storm I ever rode through," Franklin agreed. And then he was kissing her, sweet and slow and full of promise, and Clara thought about how far they had come, from strangers in the rain to partners in life, building something beautiful together. Over the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter named Emma was born in 1880, with Clara's green eyes and Franklin's stubborn chin, and then another son, Henry, in 1882, who looked like a perfect blend of both his parents. Franklin eventually became the full marshal for the territory, respected and admired for his fairness and courage, and Clara's laundry business expanded until she had 3 women working for her and was doing laundry for half the territory, her reputation for quality spreading by word of mouth. The children grew up loved and secure, knowing that their parents adored each other and would do anything for them. James became a rancher, buying his own land when he was 25 and building a cattle operation that would become one of the most successful in Montana. Emma shocked everyone by becoming a teacher and then a school administrator, one of the first women in the territory to hold such a position. Henry followed in his father's footsteps and became a lawman, carrying on the family tradition of standing for justice and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Through it all, through the years of raising children and building businesses and being pillars of their community, Franklin and Clara's love never wavered. They still made time for each other, still talked late into the night, still held hands when they walked through town, still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection that had sparked that day in the rain. When Franklin turned 50, he finally hung up his marshal's badge, deciding it was time to let younger men take on the dangerous work of law enforcement. He spent his retirement helping Clara with the laundry business, which she had expanded into a full-service operation that included dry cleaning and tailoring, and working on the land around their house, building it into a small but productive ranch that supplemented their income and gave him something to do with his hands. Clara's hair went gray and Franklin's face gained more lines, but they aged together gracefully, holding on to each other through the inevitable pains and losses that came with growing older, through the death of friends and the changes that came as Montana moved from wild frontier to established state, through the joy of watching their children marry and have children of their own. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Franklin took Clara back to the meadow where he had proposed, the same wildflowers blooming and the same view spreading out before them. They were older now, slower, but the love between them was as strong as ever, maybe even stronger for having weathered the storms of life together. "I would do it all again," Franklin said, holding Clara close. "Every bit of it, every hard day and every worry just to end up here with you." "Me too," Clara said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "That rainstorm brought me everything I ever wanted, even if I did not know it at the time. Deliver yourself to me and stay dry always." Franklin quoted his own words from that long-ago day, and they both laughed at the memory, at how young and uncertain they had been, at how much life they had lived since then. "I delivered myself to you," Clara said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "And you kept your promise. You have kept me safe and warm and loved all these years." "It has been my honor," Franklin said seriously, and Clara knew he meant it, knew that for all his rough edges and hard life, loving her and their family had been the thing he was most proud of. They lived into their 70s, rare for that time and place, and they were fortunate enough to spend their final years surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by a community that loved and respected them, by the solid foundation of a life well lived and a love well tended. Franklin died first, peacefully in his sleep on a summer night in 1923, with Clara holding his hand and his family gathered around. Clara was heartbroken but not destroyed, because she had had 47 years with the man she loved, because he had given her a full and happy life, because she knew with absolute certainty that she had been blessed beyond measure. She lived another 2 years after Franklin died, running the laundry business until the very end because it had been hers, and she was not ready to let it go, spending time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the day he had found her delivering laundry in the rain and had convinced her to deliver herself to him instead. Clara died on a rainy day in April, exactly 49 years after that first storm, and her children liked to think that she had planned it that way, that she had waited for the rain so she could step outside one last time and remember the day that had changed everything. The day a stubborn laundress and a lonely lawman had found each other in the worst weather and discovered the best thing that would ever happen to either of them. They buried Clara next to Franklin on the land they had built together, under a big oak tree that Franklin had planted the year they moved into their house. The whole town turned out for the funeral because everyone had a story about Clara, about a time she had gone out of her way to help them, about her kindness and her strength, and the way she and Franklin had shown everyone what real love looked like. At the funeral, James stood and told the story his mother had told him so many times, about the rain and the laundry and the cowboy who had said, "Deliver yourself to me and stay dry always." And there was not a dry eye in the church, because everyone understood that they had witnessed something rare and precious, a love story for the ages. The laundry business eventually closed, the buildings repurposed as Bannack grew and changed, but the house Franklin built remained in the family, passed down through the generations, each new set of occupants adding their own stories to the foundation of love that Franklin and Clara had laid. The creek still ran through the property. The oak tree grew tall and strong, and on rainy days, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of a young woman's laugh and a cowboy's low voice promising safety and warmth and love that would last forever. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually inherit the house, along with a box of letters that Franklin and Clara had written to each other during the times they had to be apart. Letters full of love and longing and everyday details that painted a picture of a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Reading those letters, the descendants understood what their ancestors had known, that real love was not just passion and romance, though Franklin and Clara had certainly had those things. Real love was choosing each other every day, was showing up when things were hard, was building something together that would outlast both of you. The story of Franklin and Clara became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished slightly with each telling but always coming back to the core truth of it, that sometimes love found you in the most unexpected ways, in the middle of a rainstorm when you were just trying to deliver laundry and stay afloat in a hard world. Sometimes love looked like a cowboy with winter blue eyes and a gruff voice offering shelter from the storm. Sometimes love was accepting that shelter and discovering that you had been delivered not just to safety, but to home, In the end, that was what Franklin and Clara had given each other, what they had built together in that cabin and then that house on the land outside Bannack. Home, safety, a place where they could be themselves, where they were valued and loved and cherished, where they could grow old together knowing that they had found something rare and precious and worth every bit of effort it took to maintain. The rain that brought them together was just water falling from the sky. The laundry was just clean cloth in a basket. But the moment Franklin had reached out to Clara, and she had accepted his help, they had started something that would ripple through generations, that would create a family and a legacy and a love story that people would still be talking about 100 years later. And if you went to Bannack today, if you visited the old cemetery where Franklin and Clara lay side by side under that oak tree, you would see flowers on their grave, left by descendants who never knew them but who understood what they had meant to each other, what they had created together. You would see a simple inscription on the shared headstone that Franklin's children had commissioned, words that captured the essence of their love story in just a few lines. Franklin Sutherland, 1844–1923, and Clara Zimmerman Sutherland, 1854–1925. He found her in the rain, she delivered herself to him, and together they built a love that weathered every storm, reunited forever in sunshine. It was a fitting epitaph for a love that had started with a simple act of kindness, with a cowboy offering shelter to a stubborn laundress, with a moment of connection in the midst of a storm that had changed two lives forever. Franklin had promised Clara that if she delivered herself to him, she would stay dry always, and he had kept that promise, not just protecting her from the weather but from loneliness and hardship, and all the storms that life could throw at a person. And Clara, for her part, had delivered herself to Franklin fully and completely, giving him her trust and her heart and her life, and together they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, a daily decision to show up and do the work and be present for each other no matter what. Their story was one of many love stories that played out in the Wild West, in the hard years of building a country and taming a frontier, but it was special in its ordinariness, in the way it showed that you did not need grand gestures or dramatic rescues or sweep you off your feet romance. Though Franklin and Clara had certainly had their share of passion and excitement. What you needed was someone who saw you, who valued you, who chose you every single day and made you feel like you were home. Franklin and Clara had given each other that gift, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that went far beyond themselves, that touched everyone who knew them and everyone who came after them, that stood as proof that love was the most powerful force in the world, capable of transforming lives and building futures, and turning a rainy day into the beginning of forever.